Hey guys, tonight we're stepping through stone corridors, lit by flickering torches, brushing past tapestries thick with dust and scandal, to explore what intimacy really looked like in medieval times. You're in a castle, but not the romanticized Disney version. There's a draft. Someone's chamber pot just sloshed down the stairs. And the guy writing poetry in the corner. Yeah. And he's wearing armor and trying not to cry about a lady who'll never touch his hand. This is no modern rom-com. It's more like a long, emotionally constipated sonnet, backed by a lute solo. You're going to find out what love, lust, and everything in between looked like for people wearing 30 pounds of wool and believing that too much passion might literally kill them. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the dim, slightly smoky hall of a noble court. The musicians have stopped playing, but no one's noticed. Eyes are locked elsewhere across the room. A knight and a lady are deep in the gaze-locking phase of courtly love. You'd think they're about to run off together. They're not. They probably won't even speak, but they might write each other painfully restrained poetry, full of lines like, "Your glance wounds me more than swords. Welcome to courtly love, where passion burns hotter the less it's acted on." It's like emotional edging. Medieval edition. This concept took off in the 12th century in places like southern France. Among the troubadours and the nobility, it was often between a knight and a noblewoman, frequently one already married. Because of course, and the whole relationship was meant to be chaste, idealized, and mostly poetic. So instead of, being together, the knight would pine dramatically, do noble deeds in her honor, and write letters like a hormonal Shakespeare. Mainstream historical fact. Courtly love heavily influenced Western concepts of romance, and many early romantic tropes, star-crossed lovers, unrequited longing, love, as suffering all trace back to this period. It also played a role in shaping chivalric codes, blending martial valor with emotional restraint. Think sword in one hand, sappy poem in the other. Now, here's a delightful little fringe detail. Some knights reportedly wore tokens of their beloved during jousts like a lady's sleeve, or even a garter. Yes, that's right. Excuse me, I'll be risking traumatic injury while wearing your hosiery. Milady, nothing says devotion like armor and lingerie. But courtly love wasn't just about looks and longing. There were actual rules, codified in treatises. The De Amore by Andreas Capellanus outlined the game flirtation as chess, with everyone pretending they weren't invested, while being very, very invested. Men had to suffer, women had to remain aloof, and no one was supposed to do the actual deed. Did they? Anyway, historians still argue whether these pure romances were ever that pure behind the castle tapestries. You glide past an overheated poet, muttering rhyming couplets about rose petals and spiritual agony. His beloved just walked by and didn't make eye contact, which probably means he's going to write 3 more stanzas about her cruelty. Meanwhile, you might be wondering, where were the peasants in all this? Excellente question. The answer is nowhere near this nonsense. Courtly love was strictly a pastime of the wealthy elite. Regular folks were too busy surviving winters and not dying of infected blisters to sit around crafting metaphors for their crushes. And even within noble circles, These affairs were double-edged. Since most noble women were married off young, often in political arrangements, the courtly love fantasy offered them a sliver of romantic escapism. But if the emotional affair tipped into physical territory, that's when things could go from sonnet to scandal real fast. Still, even within the bounds of this idealized system, humans were as ever messy. Some courtly lovers snuck around. Some relationships probably were consummated in candlelit corners. And some of those sappy poems got downright steamy once you translated the metaphors. You know, my heart burns in your presence, has layers. And remember, we're still in a world where the church had strong opinions about desire. So this whole flirtatious ballet existed in the awkward space between virtue and sin, like waving a match near a haystack, but calling it art. Let's paint one last picture before you drift deeper. Imagine you're a young knight, fresh-faced and slightly smelly, caught in the throes of poetic despair. Your noble crush has gifted you a handkerchief, or maybe just didn't glare at you during dinner. Either way, you're convinced it's true love. You spend the next week carving her initials into your shield and writing odes in terrible Latin. Eventually, you do gloriously in battle, and someone finds those odes, copies them down, and tells your tragic love story for generations. Meanwhile, the lady in question has already moved on, probably to another poet, or possibly her dog. That's courtly love. Glorious. Ridiculous. And somehow the root of every over-the-top romantic gesture ever since. So next time someone makes a playlist for their crush, instead of talking to them, just know they're basically a 12th century troubadour with better Spotify access. Now you're walking through a village at dawn, chickens underfoot, damp hay clinging to your boots, and the air thick with smoke and gossip. You're no longer among poets and knights, but deep in the world of everyday medieval people. And guess what? Their approach to intimacy was far less about tortured poems and far more about surviving the cows not trampling your laundry. Forget velvet gowns and love tokens. Welcome to peasant love, where marriage was practical. Affection was sometimes optional, and personal hygiene was, well, négociable. You duck under a wooden beam and step into a modest home, 2 rooms, maybe 3, if they're fancy. There's a hearth, a creaky bed, and yes, a whole extended family sleeping in the same space. Romantic, isn't it? If you're looking for privacy, the medieval village says, good luck. Most couples had no choice but to share space with kids, in-laws, and occasionally livestock. So any amorous activities had to be done quietly or not at all. Here's the mainstream historical fact in medieval Europe, especially before the High Middle Ages. Marriage wasn't always about love. It was about alliances, land, livestock, and getting enough children to work the field or survive the winter. Love might come later maybe, but it wasn't required at checkout. Still, just because marriage was practical didn't mean people weren't affectionate. Letters from medieval peasants, when they survive, can be shockingly sweet, and folk songs absolutely riddled with flirtation. Some are even a little spicy, depending on how well you translate the metaphors. Let's just say, plucking the flower was not always about gardening, and in the village square, flirtation was an art form. There were dances, festivals, and seasonal traditions that created the perfect excuse to lock eyes, exchange bread, or dare someone to catch you behind the mill house. Yes, romance happened, just usually with a side of mud and chores. But now for a quirky twist. Did you know that in some communities, public bedding was a thing? No, not like that. Get your mind out of the haystack. It was part of handfasting or informal engagement rituals, where villagers would literally watch a couple be tucked into bed together as a way of sealing the deal. Privacy was sacrificed in favor of accountability. And yes, someone's uncle probably stood by, holding a candle and humming awkwardly. This leads us to the church again. Big fans of rules. Not so big on unregulated love lives. Medieval doctrine declared that sex was only acceptable within marriage, and even then, it had to be for procreation, pleasure, missionary position only. Please, and only on designated holy days, which was most of the calendar. By the way, but here's the juicy debate. Historians still argue whether medieval folks actually followed these religious edicts. Some believe that peasants, being largely illiterate and often far from the direct supervision of clergy, took a more relaxed view of things. Others argue that church teachings permeated daily life deeply, shaping everything from how people dated if they could, to what they felt guilty about after. Meanwhile, back in the fields, life went on. People met at market, flirted during feasts, and formed attachments that might be tender, transactional, or both. If your neighbor had a good goat and strong arms, love was in the air, and if he danced well at May Day jackpot. Now here's a scene. It's spring, the fields are green, and the village is celebrating Beltane, a holdover from pre-Christian festivals. Bonfires are lit, young people jump over flames, and there's a lot of singing and cider. The line between sacred and sensual gets blurry fast. Think of it as ancient Tinder with fire hazards. But not everyone played by the rules. Medieval court records are full of fascinating tidbits. Women charged with enticement, men accused of seduction under promise of marriage, and even couples punished for, brace yourself, dancing too closely. Somewhere, a monk was frowning very, very hard. And here's a fringe detail you didn't ask for in some villages. People believed that a man could lose his essence. Wink wink if a woman wore his hat. That's right. Hat theft equals magical intimacy theft, which raises a lot of questions about medieval haberdashery. Despite the rigid social expectations, people were people. There was love, betrayal, lust, longing, awkward moments, and happy endings. And sometimes, someone ran off with the blacksmith, and the entire village talked about it for decades. Picture this now. You're at a harvest festival. A girl you've liked since spring offers you a honey cake. Your hands touch. You both pretend not to blush. Later that night, you dance near the fire, trying not to step on her feet. The stars are out. Someone plays a pipe badly in the background, and for a brief moment, life feels soft, even magical, until her brother sees you and demands you declare your intentions. Medieval romance. The truth is, intimacy among the lower classes was woven into the rhythm of daily survival. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It had weight, warmth, frustration, and laughter, like every hay-stuffed mattress and candlelit glance. These weren't sterile textbook lives. They were messy, hopeful, and deeply human. So next time you hear someone wax nostalgic about simpler times, just remember they probably haven't tried wooing someone while sharing a one-room house with 6 relatives and a goat who chews the bed linen. You're now winding through the halls of a stone monastery, footsteps echoing off cold flagstones, the scent of ink, beeswax, and something vaguely medicinal hangs in the air. This time, your journey doesn't lead to lovers in fields or haylofts, but to the minds and rules shaping medieval intimacy from the top down. Enter the world of monks, nuns, and moral panic. Because when the church wasn't busy translating scripture, it was busy micromanaging everyone's libido. Let's not beat around the confession booth. Medieval religious leaders had a lot of opinions. Sex, to them, was a powerful force, dangerous if misused, holy if channeled correctly, and absolutely terrifying if it involved any fun. You shuffle into a dark scriptorium where a monk is copying a text about the 7 deadly sins. He's on lust again, probably for the 5th time this week. Not because he's obsessed or anything, but let's just say lust got a lot of airplay. You glance at the margins and see that he's doodled a goat. The goat has devil horns. Make of that what you will. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Catholic Church viewed sex as acceptable only within marriage, and, primarily for the purpose of procreation. Pleasure wasn't the point. Anything that deviated from this narrow framework, whether it was premarital, extramarital, same sex, or gasp, even too enthusiastic, was considered sinful, and so, the clergy kept lists. Long, detailed lists. Medieval penitentials, the confession guides for priests, included what we can only describe as the most awkward FAQs in history. These guides laid out which acts were sinful, what penance they required, and sometimes even how many days in purgatory you'd rack up. It was basically the world's least fun instruction manual. Historians still argue whether these guides were followed closely or just theoretical. Some believe they were widely enforced, especially in urban centers where bishops kept tighter control. Others think these guides reflected the church's ideal, not the reality in peasant huts or noble bedchambers. Either way, the gap between doctrine and behavior, let's just say it was more of a canyon, but monks and nuns weren't immune to these struggles either. Despite their vows of chastity, many faced temptation and sometimes gave in. Take the curious case of a nun who confessed that she and a fellow sister shared more than prayers, or the abbot who kept a suspiciously pretty assistant who wasn't listed in any official register. Oops. Some monasteries were so rife with scandal that the Pope had to send cleanup crews, and by cleanup crews, we mean really grumpy bishops with quills and torches who took names and tore down secret tunnels. Yes, tunnels. Some convents had hidden doors, leading straight into nearby villages. Why, let's just say not everyone took cloistered literally. And here's a quirky tidbit. It wasn't just people the clergy feared. They believed demons could tempt you in your dreams. Nighttime emissions, obviously, the work of succubi or incubi, those mischievous demons who could bypass your conscious will and ruin your eternal soul before breakfast. Honestly, blaming a demon sounds like a solid legal defense. Yet despite all the fire and brimstone rhetoric, the church also had a weirdly practical side. They gave out marriage advice, regulated betrothal contracts, and even allowed annulments under very specific and confusing circumstances. If your spouse was impotent, that could be grounds. If you were related too closely, also a yes. If you just didn't like them, sorry. You're stuck. I hope you like arguing about goats for 40 years. Now step into the confession box. It's dark, musty, and vaguely smells like old bread. You whisper your sins through a wooden screen, and a tired priest mutters Latin phrases. In return, say 3 Hail Marys. Avoid market day for a week, and stop thinking about your neighbor's shoulders. Okay, Father, of course, All this control created plenty of backlash. Some medieval thinkers, especially in later centuries, began challenging the extremes. Maybe, they suggested timidly, married love could include affection, maybe even joy. This wasn't revolutionary yet, but the seeds were planted. You can thank them next time someone buys you flowers, just because. Still, the tension between pleasure and penance remained. The church taught that the body was weak and sinful, but also that marriage was a sacrament. Sex was a gift, but only if you signed the right paperwork and used it correctly. Confused, so was everyone else. That's why medieval sermons often sounded like really stressed out advice columns. Imagine now, a young priest pacing his tiny cell, torn between his vow and the pretty shepherdess who smiled at him during Mass. He writes a tortured letter to his mentor. He quotes Augustine. He stares dramatically at the moon. Then he burns the letter and goes to ring the morning bell. Life moves on. The sheep remain unimpressed. And here's your third light joke of the section. Monks believed silence was a virtue, but clearly not. When it came to writing 800 pages about sin, nothing says quiet contemplation, like listing all the forbidden positions in tiny Gothic script. All this talk about rules might make you think medieval people were constantly repressed. But here's the twist: they found ways around things. Dispensations, confessions, creative reinterpretations. Humans are endlessly inventive, especially when affection and attraction are on the line. The clergy could preach one thing, but behind closed doors, let's just say medieval passion was rarely fully extinguished. You wander back out into the courtyard, past a weathered statue of Mary and an ancient olive tree. Somewhere nearby, a bell tolls for evening prayer. You exhale slowly, feeling the centuries settle over you. Rules, rituals, regrets, and beneath it all the quiet, universal hum of desire, trying to stay holy in a very human world. Your feet crunch softly over frost-laced cobblestones as you leave the cloister behind, wandering into the cobbled tangle of a medieval town. The air smells of chimney smoke and last week's fish market, and the streets hum with an entirely different kind of energy. This isn't about priests or parchment anymore. Tonight, you're slipping into the curious world of sex work and morality laws, where medieval cities tried to balance moral panic with economic reality, and never quite managed either. It's late, and lanterns flicker in the doorways of low wooden buildings. You pass a house with a red cloth tied to the post. No mystery there. Laughter spills out from behind a curtain, followed by a snatch of lute music. A dog sniffs your boot disapprovingly. Welcome to the red light district of the 14th century, where pleasure had a price and everyone pretended not to notice. Let's start with your mainstream historical fact. Prostitution was legal in many parts of medieval Europe. That's right, legally sanctioned brothels, often run or taxed by the city itself. Why? Because banning it outright didn't work, and leaders figured it was better to contain and control it than spark chaos. Better one rotten barrel, they reasoned, than the whole cellar spoiled. These official brothels weren't glamorous. They were usually located outside city centers, near rivers or walls, places easy to monitor, but far from respectable society. They had curfews. They paid taxes. In some towns, brothel workers even wore color-coded sashes, so they wouldn't be mistaken for respectable women. It was medieval branding, basically. And here's a quirky tidbit for you: in some places, the local authorities provided uniforms. Yes, the town of Augsburg reportedly handed out matching outfits to women working in legal brothels. possibly to reinforce the illusion of order. Imagine showing up to your shift in your state-issued smock, like a really tragic medieval Starbucks. But here's where things get messier. Even though the sex trade was technically allowed, it was soaked in contradiction. Public preachers railed against it. Customers flocked to it. And the church kept trying to square the moral circle. Brothels were seen as a necessary evil tolerated to protect good women and prevent worse sins like adultery or homosexuality. Woohoo! Historians still argue whether brothel regulation truly protected the women involved or simply institutionalized their exploitation. On paper, women in licensed houses had some legal protections. In reality, many were vulnerable, poor, and trapped by debt. Records show cases of abuse, blackmail, and indenture, basically women forced into sex work to pay off impossible loans. It's capitalism, but make it feudal. Not all sex workers were the same, though some women operated independently, especially in port cities or along trade routes. Others, called courtesans or kept women, served wealthy men and lived relatively cushy lives if they played their cards right. These women often owned property, commissioned art, and sometimes even influenced politics from behind silk curtains. Dangerous, yes, but also kind of iconic. The church, of course, tried to crack down, at least publicly. Periodic moral panics erupted, especially during times of famine or plague. Brothels were closed, women were fined or whipped, and sermons warned of the fires of Sodom. Then 6 months later, the same officials quietly reopened the houses and collected their taxes again. Very on brand. Now let's talk about the men. Knights, clergy, merchants, even students. Many visited brothels, often openly. Some university towns even had special brothels for scholars, like a depressing form of student housing. Picture a very hungover monk in training, trying to finish his Latin homework after a study break. He probably didn't ace that test, but things weren't static. Over time, attitudes shifted. By the late Middle Ages, especially after the Black Death, public sentiment hardened, disease fears, changing theology, and rising Puritanism led to stricter laws. Brothels were closed in many cities. Sex workers were arrested or exiled. Ironically, this pushed the trade underground, making it even more dangerous. Even then, people found ways around the rules. In Florence, enterprising madams set up bathing establishments that just happened to offer extras. In London, singing girls performed behind curtain booths. And in Paris, a brothel operated right across from the University of the Sorbonne. Truly an educational experience. Let's sneak in our third light joke now. If hypocrisy were a medieval building material, the entire city would be made of bricks, forged in moral outrage and delivered by mule. One of the most revealing facts. In some cities, brothel profits were used to fund public services. A portion of the taxes went to maintaining roads, bridges, or even hospitals. So, the next time someone walked across a sturdy medieval bridge, they might unknowingly have a local courtesan to thank. Public works have never been so ironically sponsored. As you move through the city, a bell chimes curfew, doors are bolted, lanterns flicker out. Somewhere behind you, a woman whispers to a client through a wooden hatch. There's a scrape of coin, a muttered prayer, and a door creaks open. The deal is quiet, transactional, human. You pose, breath, forming mist in the air. Tonight, the streets may be silent, but the tension between piety and practicality continues humming beneath the surface. They preached chastity, but taxed sin. They banned pleasure, but sold indulgences. They judged women while protecting their customers. And through it all, the world turned, full of contradictions, shadows, and candlelight. You walk on, past sleeping cats, shuttered taverns, and dreams that probably cost more than a few silver pennies. The moralists may have shouted from pulpits, but the people, they lived in the grey spaces in between. The sky begins to pale, ever so slightly, but your journey presses on, pulling you away from the murmuring city and towards something quieter, yet no less charged, the private realm of marriage. Monastic vows and forbidden desire. You trudge up a hill lined with olive trees and ancient stone walls, the scent of thyme and morning dew curling in the air. A rooster crows, late to the party. Now you're standing at the threshold of a medieval manor. Behind one door, a noble couple lies back to back in an ornate bed, their marital harmony as chilly as the limestone floor. Behind another, a monk kneels in desperate prayer, hands trembling from more than just devotion. Across the countryside, countless others navigate the chasm between doctrine and desire. Your mainstream historical fact here is pretty simple but startling in much of medieval Europe. Marriage wasn't primarily about love. It was a contract, a legal and spiritual alliance. If romantic feelings happened to pop up, great, but more often, people married for land, heirs, and status points. The church treated it as a sacrament, but families treated it like a real estate deal with livestock bonuses. So, what did that mean for bedroom life? Well, picture two strangers, possibly married in their teens, sharing a bed for the first time after a feast fueled by boiled wine and questionable stew. If you think your dating life is awkward, remember, these people were basically Tinder swiped by their parents. Consent was, let's say, loosely defined. Church law technically required mutual agreement, but enforcement was murky. Women, especially noble women, had little say, and annulments were rare unless you had serious papal connections. Ironically, though, the church also said sex was only allowed inside marriage, and only for procreation. Anything else lust, enjoyment, experimentation was suspect. So, basically do it, but don't like it. Here's your quirky tidbit. The church actually had a list of acceptable days you could not have sex. These included Sundays, feast days, Lent, Advent, Fridays, Wednesdays, and pretty much any time someone sneezed. If followed strictly, the average medieval couple was left with about 100 legal nights per year. And you thought modern schedules were busy? Of course. People didn't follow it strictly. That's why there were so many confessions and penance manuals. Forgive me, Father, for I got creative on a feast day. The manual would then assign a proper punishment, anything from fasting to years of silence. Historians still argue whether these manuals reflected real life or just what nervous bishops hoped people were doing. And while we're discussing things that made monks sweat, let's peek inside those cloisters. Monastic vows required celibacy. Yes, but human nature often said otherwise. From erotic dreams to whispered encounters in abbey gardens, the tension between spiritual devotion and bodily urges was real. Many monks and nuns confessed to struggles with lust, some even leaving their orders to marry scandalous, but understandable. In one 12th century abbey, nuns were found writing love, poetry to each other. In another, a monk was caught hiding a lover in the cellar. And then there's the case of a bishop who kept a mistress in his official residence and defended it by claiming she was a housekeeper. Sure, Jeanne, one of the most complex areas, though, was same-sex desire, technically condemned. Yes, but still present in art, letters, and even religious texts. Historians still argue whether medieval expressions of same-sex intimacy were platonic or erotic. Some letters between monks and between nuns read like pure romance. Others leave a little more to interpretation. Either way, the boundaries weren't as clean-cut as we might imagine. Meanwhile, back in the manor house, things weren't exactly heating up. Noble marriages often became icy battlegrounds. Infidelity was common, especially among noblemen, and occasionally tolerated if done discreetly. Women who cheated faced harsher consequences, banishment, penance, or, in extreme cases, execution. So, super fair. But love still managed to bloom in odd places. Troubadours wrote songs about longing. Secret affairs blossomed under courtly pretenses. One famous story tells of Abelard and Heloise, he a teacher, she a student, their passion, sparking scandal, pregnancy, and eventual exile to separate monasteries. Romantic, yes. Tragic, absolutely. It's like medieval Romeo and Juliet, with more Latin homework and fewer balconies. At the lower end of society, peasant couples had more flexibility. They often chose their own spouses and lived more practical, if rustic, lives. There are records of genuine affection, shared chores, and laughter amid muddy floors in drafty cottages. It wasn't glamorous, but sometimes it worked. So, what did medieval people really think about intimacy? They were curious, conflicted, and deeply human. They listened to sermons, warning against temptation, then wrote poems celebrating it. They took vows of chastity and broke them. They married for duty and dreamed of desire. And in between, they invented elaborate moral loopholes, like the widespread belief that the missionary position was the only acceptable one, except when it wasn't, or the idea that pleasure should be avoided, except when it meant fulfilling your wifely duty. One guidebook even instructed couples to say a prayer immediately after intimacy, ideally while still in bed, because nothing says romance like invoking divine forgiveness. With your socks still on, you leave the manor behind, the stone walls fading into the mist. Somewhere behind you, a candle gutters out. A monk finishes a whispered prayer. Alone, a noble woman stares at the rafters in the dark, wondering if the future will be kinder. A troubadour begins a new song, and you, still walking, carry their stories forward, because beneath the layers of ritual, robes, and rosaries, medieval people still struggled with the same questions we ask today. What does love look like when it's not allowed? What happens when desire collides with duty? And why? Oh, why? Does the church keep micromanaging bedroom stuff? Your path winds through a narrow village lane now, where the air smells faintly of yeast, smoke, and someone boiling cabbage, far too enthusiastically. A crooked wooden sign swings above a door, a silhouette of two tankards clinking. Inside this medieval tavern, stories pour faster than the ale, and the subject matter, often tips toward the saucy, the scandalous, and the secret. Tonight, you slip into a corner bench beside a group of chattering townsfolk. What are they whispering about? Oh, just court cases, public punishments, and what happens when things go very wrong behind closed doors. Let's start with a bit of spicy legal reality. Sex was absolutely a matter of public interest in medieval law. In places like England and France, courts frequently heard cases involving adultery, impotence, sexual assault, and, wait for it, insufficient bedroom enthusiasm. That last one wasn't a joke. If a woman could prove her husband wasn't performing his sacred marital duties, she could petition the court for divorce, or at least for an inspection. Yes, a literal physical inspection, in public, with witnesses. May you never complain about modern dating again. One real case involved a woman who brought her husband before the bishop's court, demanding annulment. Her evidence, a lack of matrimonial presence. The husband tried to defend himself, but when he couldn't, well, let's just say the church was quick to separate them. Historians still argue whether these tests were actual medical procedures or more symbolic theatre to protect reputations. The mainstream fact here is pretty clear. The medieval church held immense control over sexual norms, and the courts enforced it. But those courts were surprisingly nosy and weirdly creative. Trials sometimes included testimony from ex-lovers, midwives, and even neighbors who heard things. You can't make this up though. Someone probably did. Now for a more fringe tidbit. In some medieval Italian towns, men could be fined for wasting seed outside of procreative intercourse. In other words, if you indulged in solo activities and someone found out, you could face a fine, public penance, or both. Imagine getting written up at work for something you did in the privacy of your candlelit bedroom, or worse, behind the stables. It's a miracle the population survived. But the real meat of the gossip stew is adultery. The double standard was massive. If a man cheated on his wife, he might get a slap on the wrist, maybe a pilgrimage or donation. But if a woman was caught public shaming, annulment, beatings, or worse, in some towns, unfaithful wives were paraded through the streets with shaved heads or forced to wear humiliating clothes. It was less medieval housewives and more Game of Thrones walk of shame. Still, women found ways to rebel. Some had affairs with knights, clerics, or even other women. One juicy 14th century case involved a noblewoman caught in bed with a priest. He tried to bribe the guards to let him escape out the window. He failed, dramatically, and he was discovered without his trousers. The priest was defrocked. The woman was sent to a convent where she reportedly met another lover within the year. You can't keep a scandalous soul down. Then there's the matter of brothels, which weren't just tolerated, they were regulated. Cities like London and Paris actually licensed them, placed them under church oversight, and even set specific off hours for business. Yes, brothels had medieval HR. Some even paid taxes. In certain districts, brothel workers were required to wear striped clothing or specific headdresses to mark their profession. Subtle, not even slightly. But don't let the regulation fool you, stigma still clung to these women, despite their critical role in the local economy. One chronicler described them as necessary evils, a view that somehow justified their existence, while condemning them at the same time. Classic. And yet, some brothel workers were fiercely independent. They built communities, supported each other, and sometimes gained unexpected allies. There's even a story of a brothel worker who donated a stained glass window to a local church. Historians still argue whether this was an act of piety or PR. Now, medieval punishments for sexual crimes were just as wild as you'd expect. If you were caught being too intimate with someone of the wrong class, gender, or marital status, you could be whipped, exiled, or even branded. Some towns made couples walk through the marketplace holding hands, followed by children banging pots and shouting. It was less scarlet letter and more medieval TikTok roast. And here's the part where medieval reality really throws you impotence. Trials weren't always about biology. Sometimes, a man accused of being useless in bed would claim he was cursed. Yes, cursed. As in, someone bewitched his body, and then the court would have to find out whether that was true. Cue the appearance of witch specialists, amulets, and very confused judges. The church half believed it. Townsfolk whispered about it, and women sometimes used it as an escape hatch from a bad marriage. Clever, absolutely. Sexual violence, unfortunately, was a dark and prevalent shadow. The church condemned it, but enforcement was inconsistent. Survivors often faced blame or were forced to marry their attackers, an unspeakable injustice. Some communities, though, did offer public support, including restitution and shelter. It wasn't enough, but it was a flicker of hope in a grim reality. You pause outside the tavern now, the murmurs and candlelight behind you fading. Somewhere in that smoky room, a bard starts to sing softly, a tale of lovers caught by moonlight, of secrets whispered in walled gardens, and of judges who pretended not to hear what they clearly heard. One last whisper trails you as you walk in a world where nearly every move was judged by the church, by the courts, by your neighbor's goat. People still found quiet moments to rebel, to laugh, to love, and somehow, despite the rules, the fines, the curses, and the shame parades, life went on. You slipped past the flickering lamplight of the town and into a quieter path now toward a dim, ivy-covered monastery wall. The stones are cool beneath your fingertips, the silence heavy with centuries of secrets. This final part of your midnight walk leads not through bustling taverns or echoing castle halls, but into the thoughts and contradictions of the medieval mind. It's where passion collides with penance, and doctrine wrestles with desire. By now, you've seen how the medieval world tried to organize intimacy. But what about what people believed about the body? Sin and pleasure itself. Strap in, or unstrap, depends on how devout you're feeling tonight. Let's start with the church again, because of course, we must. The dominant Christian teaching of the Middle Ages viewed sex as necessary but dangerous, like fire useful in a hearth, catastrophic on your hay roof, married sex for procreation, acceptable, anything else, a slippery slope to eternal damnation, complete with pitchforks and Gregorian guilt music. Theologians like St. Augustine insisted that even married couples should avoid enjoying themselves too much. Yes, joy itself was viewed with suspicion. If you smiled during it, Augustine would probably frown from beyond the grave. It wasn't just about behavior, it was about internal intent. Desire was a thing to fear, control, and confess, and yet, people kept falling in love, kissing in shadowy gardens, sneaking notes between castle walls, getting caught, and doing it again anyway. Medieval monks wrote entire confession guides, listing all the possible sins a person might confess, including inventive positions, thoughts during sermons, and even dreams. Yes, your dreams. Nighttime fantasies were catalogued like tax forms. Sorry. No. Deductions for creative subconsciousness. Still, historians still argue whether these strict teachings were ever fully enforced, or even followed. In peasant villages, people often lived together before marriage. Children were conceived prematurely, and clerics quietly ignored what they couldn't control. One bishop in 13th century France was so overwhelmed by fornication cases that he reportedly declared, "If I punished every one of them, I'd have no farmers left." There's the mainstream historical fact. The ideals and rules were strict, but enforcement varied wildly. What the church preached from the pulpit often looked very different from what happened after dark behind barn doors. And then we come to the quirkiest corners of belief. Did you know that medieval doctors sometimes prescribed sex as a treatment for women? Especially female hysteria, which basically meant anything from sadness to indigestion, was thought to be treatable by encouraging marital intimacy. One physician advised husbands to apply vigorous conjugal contact to rebalance the humors. Translation: go forth and cuddle. Enthusiastically, other medical texts warned of the opposite, that too much sex could melt the marrow or drain a man's vital spirit. You know that post-nap brain fog feeling, according to some medieval thinkers? That was your soul, leaking out, slowly, through your pores. You're welcome. Then there were the folk beliefs less theological, more magical. Some people wore amulets to increase their powers. Others brewed love potions using herbs, honey, or more questionable ingredients. A particularly bold recipe from 14th century Italy included wine boiled with hair clippings and menstrual blood. Romantic. Right. The Middle Ages, where romance met pot roast. Some of these potions were sold by cunning women, herbalists, or even disgruntled neighbors. Others were made in secret, hidden beneath beds, or buried at crossroads. The church condemned all of it as witchcraft, but demand never waned. Turns out, you can't excommunicate curiosity, and if you're thinking all of this was purely heterosexual, think again. Though harshly punished when discovered, same-gender love and relationships absolutely existed. Monastic writings occasionally hint at deep emotional and possibly physical bonds between monks. Poots described longing glances between maidens, warriors, and traveling minstrels. Even legal records from medieval London document a secret male brothel raided, closed, and quietly reopened under a different name. Ye olde discretion indeed. Again, historians still argue whether these relationships were romantic, platonic, or somewhere beautifully in between. What's clear is that medieval people felt a range of desires, just like us. The rules may have been different, the risks higher, but the emotions, the same tangled mess of longing, joy, confusion, and heartbreak. As you walk along the crumbling cloister wall, your path narrows between crickets and quiet. A monk passes silently by, candle in hand, eyes forward, but you know he's heard everything. Behind those tranquil stone walls were confessions whispered at dawn, forbidden liaisons, and longing scrawled in the margins of holy books. In one particularly poignant case, a nun was punished for writing love poems to another sister. The church burned the letters, but someone copied them first, and those verses, they survived. Centurie la terre, You can still read her trembling rhymes. A flicker of rebellion pressed between the pages of a prayer book. Your journey tonight ends at the edge of a moonlit field where peasants used to gather after dusk, talking, flirting, dancing, touching hands under layers of wool and straw. They weren't saints. They were human, curious, hopeful, impulsive, full of hunger and laughter and secret dreams. One more whisper before we sleep, for all their rules and rituals. Medieval people carved out little spaces between sermons and sowing seasons for love, lust, and everything in between. They lit candles against the dark, just like you. And now, you ease back from those torchlit corridors, step away from crumbling castles and ink-stained monasteries, and let the gentle hush of sleep settle in around you. The last candle flickers out. The world of medieval passions and penance quiets behind you like a door slowly creaking shut. Your feet find softer ground now, cool linen sheets instead of flagstone floors. You're not surrounded by relics anymore, just quiet. Maybe a breeze stirs the edge of your blanket, or the faint hum of a fan mimics the wind curling around the towers of some forgotten abbey. Whatever you carry from this journey, curious thoughts, raised eyebrows, or just the comforting murmur of history being unrolled like an old tapestry, let it float gently away. There's no need to untangle all the contradictions tonight. The Middle Ages were full of rules, I'm sure, but they were just as full of people who bent them, broke them, or never believed them to begin with. Let your mind soften into the calm hum of that idea that even in a world ruled by scrolls and sermons, there was laughter behind chapel walls, gentle hands in the dark, and hearts thudding fast in secret corners. Things change. People don't. So close your eyes. Let your breath slow. Somewhere beyond the hills, a monastery bell tolls the final note of night. And even the monks, scandalous or saintly, settle into their dreams. You made it through medieval morality. See, you survived. Hey guys, tonight we're time traveling to a smoky, sunlit marketplace in ancient Athens. You're wandering through marble colonnades, the scent of olives and hot dust in the air, dodging philosophers like they're pigeons, trying to sell you wisdom instead of breadcrumbs. You overhear passionate debates about justice and the soul, while some guy in sandals accidentally walks straight into a statue and pretends it didn't happen. Welcome to the birthplace of Stoicism, a world both dazzling and disorienting, where clarity feels like a myth, and every third person claims to know the truth. You'll want to keep your emotional armor on for this one. You're about to meet someone whose life goes down in flames, literally shipwrecked, and yet he decides to build an entirely new way of seeing the world. Stoicism might sound like stone-faced boredom to you now, but by the end of tonight, you'll understand why it's less about suppressing feelings and more about transforming chaos into clarity. And yes, you probably won't survive this if you're hoping for soft, fluffy life advice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the Agora, ancient Athens' beating heart. It's 300 BCE, and your tunic's already clinging to your back with sweat. The sun doesn't care about your delicate constitution, and neither does the old woman barking prices for her fish just inches from your ear. Philosophers drift in and out of view, like over-caffeinated seagulls, launching into arguments at the drop of a scroll. Over there, see that man, walking slowly, deliberately, like his entire body is trying to remember how to be calm. That Zeno of Citium. It looks a little lost, doesn't he? That's because he is. A few months ago, the man was a successful merchant from Cyprus. Then, his ship, packed with precious purple dye, sank somewhere between almost safe and absolutely ruined. And like anyone who's lost everything, Zeno wandered into a bookshop. You sidle up next to him as he cracks open a biography of Socrates. You both read in silence, absorbing tales of the man who calmly drank poison rather than sell out his beliefs. Zeno doesn't weep. He doesn't wail. He just sits there thinking, what if this was it, the turning point? Historians still argue whether Zeno stumbled into the shop by accident, or if he was already searching for something deeper than a career in commerce. Either way, that dusty book changes his life. He starts haunting Athens like a philosopher ghost. He studies under Crates the cynic, more on him later, and tries out ideas like a man trying on strange shoes. Over the years, he mixes Socratic toughness, cynic simplicity, and a smattering of logic into something new, something focused, clean, and somehow serene, even in the messiness of life. He teaches it publicly, not in grand temples, but on a painted porch, the Stoa Poikile. That's where the name Stoicism comes from. Not from some fancy divine revelation, or a scroll sent by the gods. Nope. A porch. You can practically hear the pigeons cooing in the background, but don't be fooled by the casual setting. Zeno's philosophy is no chill backyard chat. His ideas are sharp, minimalist, and demanding. He teaches that the only thing truly in your control is your judgment, your ability to decide how you interpret and respond to what happens. That's it. Everything else, your body, your job, your TikTok likes. Okay, maybe not that last one is ultimately out of your hands. To crave them is to suffer. To cling to them is to drown. You sit on a smooth stone bench, watching him lecture to anyone willing to listen. His voice isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. The clarity is in the content, not the volume. He says virtue is the only true good, and that emotions fear, jealousy, ragiarent random, but come from mistaken judgments. In other words, your meltdown about your roommate, using your toothbrush again, totally optional. It's not just theory. Zeno lives like this. He eats little, walks calmly, sleeps on the floor, and seems totally unbothered by social snubs. He's like that friend who genuinely doesn't care about being left out of the group chat. Here's a quirky detail for you, legend has it. Zeno died laughing. Or rather, from laughing, he tripped, fell, and hit his head. When someone asked how he felt, he made a joke about the fall being fate's way of telling him it was time to leave. Then he held his breath and died. Try beating that for a mic drop exit. But this early stoicism isn't all brooding monk energy. It's social. It's engaged. It's oddly optimistic. You're not supposed to isolate yourself in a cave. You're supposed to use your reason to engage with the world virtuously, bravely, wisely, and with self-control. Emotions still allowed, just trained. Like wild animals you're teaching to sit, stay, and maybe not destroy your entire week because someone cut you off in traffic. Stoicism catches on slowly. At this point, it's still a fringe movement. Athens already has plenty of philosophers yelling about pleasure, gods, atoms, and golden means, but something about Stoicism, its restraint, its discipline starts to draw people in. Zeno isn't flashy. He doesn't write catchy slogans or host giant symposiums, but his teachings survive because they resonate. They offer a sense of solid ground in a world where plagues, war, and losing your life to a random sailing accident are all pretty normal. You lean back against the wall of the stoa, closing your eyes. The air smells like sun-baked stone and fig trees. Somewhere, a flute plays. You think about everything you worry about back in your own life, fitting in, finding purpose, managing the existential horror of overflowing laundry. Then you remember Zeno's words, "The chief good is a smooth flow of life." Smooth doesn't mean perfect. It means aligned with nature, with logic, with virtue. It means staying calm in the storm and recognizing the storm isn't yours to control anyway. And for a brief moment, under that painted porch, you feel it. Mental clarity, not the kind that hits like lightning, but the soft kind like slowly realizing you've been clenching your jaw for the last 5 years and finally letting go. Zeno smiles slightly, seeing the look on your face. He knows that look. You're not stoic yet, but you're curious, and that's enough to start. You shift your weight on the stone bench. Still under the painted porch, the Stoa Poikile. It's early morning now, and the marble tiles are cool beneath your sandals. The Athenian sun hasn't reached its daily vengeance yet, but give it time. Across the square, stray dogs stretch like philosophers, pretending to have a thesis. Zeno is here again, right on schedule. You're not sure he ever leaves. He doesn't stand on a pedestal or wave his arms like some tragic poet. He simply walks and talks. No scrolls, no props, just kie, confident pacing beneath murals that depict both beauty and horror battles, gods and heroes, frozen mid-scream. It's fitting. Actually, this blend of chaos and calm. You fall in step beside him. He notices. Barely. His lecture resumes as if you've always been here. He's talking about Logos, the divine rational order of the universe. Sound grand it is, but Zeno insists that everything is part of it, including your morning coffee, anxiety, and the embarrassing thing you said in 9th grade that still haunts you at 2 a.m. Here's the idea. Everything happens according to reason, even if you don't like it, even if it ruins your shoes. And humans, we have a slice of that logos inside us. It's what lets us think, weigh choices, and if we're lucky, become wise. So if your judgments align with reason, you're golden. If they're based on fear, envy, or that voice in your head screaming, "Why is everyone staring at me?" you're gonna suffer. Not because life is cruel, but because you're misreading the script. Zeno draws 4 pillars in the dust with a stick wisdom: courage, justice, and temperance. These aren't just Boy Scout virtues. They're the compass of stoicism. You want to be happy? Great. Learn to act wisely. Stand your ground. Treat others fairly. And don't eat the entire olive loaf in one sitting just because you had a rough day. Historians still argue whether Zeno invented this cardinal virtues model himself or borrowed it from earlier Pythagoreans and Socratics. Either way, he's the guy who gave it a PR upgrade and nailed it to Stoic philosophy like a manifesto. But here's where things get juicy. Zeno says that virtue alone is sufficient for happiness. Not pleasure, not wealth, not fame, just virtue. So even if you're broke, heartbroken, or trapped in a 3-hour philosophical debate about the soul of a cucumber, you can still be content if your soul is aligned. You think about this as your stomach growls. Zeno keeps going, now talking about indifference. These are things that aren't inherently good or bad health. A reputation. Parking tickets. Most people chase or fear these like rabid squirrels. Boot. Stoicism says, meh. They're fine. Enjoy them if they come. Let them go if they don't. You nod, trying to look serene. Even though your stomach sounds like it's chewing through your own pancreas, a student beside you snorts. So if I get a free lunch, I should just shrug. Zeno smiles gently. You should appreciate it, but don't build your peace of mind on its arrival. And just like that, he's cracked your emotional code wide open. Half your stress comes not from events themselves, but from your tangled expectations about them. You realize that hoping someone texts you back, expecting traffic to disappear, or needing everything to go your way is a weird kind of trap, a trap you set for yourself. Daily, Zeno finishes the morning session by pointing to the mural of the Battle of Marathon. Warriors frozen, in panic. Spears midair. Horses rearing. Even in battle. He says, a Stoic can be free. Free from the slavery of fear. You blink. That feels like a big claim. But the idea sticks with you. As the midday heat starts to bake the porch tiles like pita bread, you wander through the agora. You pass other schools, the Epicureans over there, whispering about friendship and figs. The Peripatetics struck by, preaching Aristotle with the smugness of a man who invented syllables. Everyone thinks they've cracked life's code, but Zeno's voice keeps echoing in your ears. Focus on what you can control. Accept what you can't. You stop at a fountain and splash your face. The water's cold, and suddenly you're alert again. In this haze of thought, you start to notice something. Stoicism isn't about shutting down emotion. It's about mastering it. Like learning to surf rather than being thrashed underwater every time a wave of life smacks you in the face. You remember something odd Zeno mentioned once. Barely audible, he admired a man named Stilpo, a Megarian philosopher who supposedly lost his entire family and city in a war, and when asked how he was, said, I have lost nothing that belongs to me. Whether he meant that stoically or sassily, historians still debate. Either way, the point landed. You walk back to the Stoa for the evening talk. The painted porch glows gold in the setting sun. Zeno is talking again. Now about death. You flinch because, let's be honest, no one ever wants to think about that. But Zeno doesn't flinch. He says death is part of nature's cycle. You are a wave returning to the ocean. You are a flame flickering out, not extinguished in fear, but return to the cosmic fire. A chill brushes your neck. Not from fear, just awe. There's something terrifyingly peaceful in what he's saying. You won't live forever. You won't control the universe. But you can live rightly, for as long as you're given. And that might be enough. A sleepy student beside you mutters, what if I can't live up to all this? Zeno just shrugs. Then, begin again tomorrow. You stare at the sky. No grand conclusion. No sermon. Just a gentle nudge to return to what matters. You don't need to change the world tonight. You just need to change how you see the world. And maybe that's where mental clarity begins, not with more information, but with fewer illusions. You exhale, long and slow. The day softens into twilight. Somewhere a lyre strums lazily. You start walking home through the darkening streets, past flickering oil lamps and the low hum of voices. Your mind, for once, isn't spinning. You wake up curled on a reed mat. sore from the stone floor, and still thinking about Zeno's calm, annoying wisdom. As the Athenian sun climbs into your eyeballs, you make your way through the alleys, sidestepping stray goats and the occasional pile of philosophical garbage, mostly scrolls someone threw out after realizing they'd accidentally reinvented sadness. You're heading to meet a very different kind of thinker. Less toga, more chaos, and probably smells like yesterday's olives. There's a man living in a barrel. That's not a metaphor. It's an actual ceramic wine jar turned real estate solution. His name is Diogenes, and he's one of Zeno's early influences, even if he'd roll his eyes at the idea of having influence on anyone. Where Zeno speaks in quiet tones and perfect logic, Diogenes shouts at clouds, lives off onions, and once tried to lecture Plato by plucking a chicken. You find him sunbathing in the nude, basking like a lizard, and somehow still more self-possessed than anyone you've ever met. You are you, Diogenes the cynic. Him. Depends. Are you someone worth talking to? You sit down anyway. Because, hey, who better to learn about clarity than someone who's voluntarily rejected everything, he explains, while scratching his beard with what might be a fishbone, that the key to peace is freedom, and the key to freedom is owning nothing. No decides. No reputation. No fancy lecture schedule. Just self-sufficiency and brutal honesty. Zeno studied under Crates, one of Diogenes' students. So Stoicism, despite its sleek veneer, has deep roots in the Cynic tradition, roots that smell like armpit and defiance. The Cynics rejected not only wealth, but social conventions. Marrying pointless. Shame. A social invention. Pants optional. Obviously, historians still argue whether Diogenes genuinely believed in the total abandonment of society, or was performing a sort of satirical protest. Either way, his legacy is fierce. Challenge everything. Laugh at power. Simplify until you're untouchable. It's extreme. Sure, but it feeds into the Stoic idea that happiness isn't found in externals. If Diogenes can be content in a jar, you can probably handle missing the bus without spiraling. He tells you about the time Alexander the Great visited him. Yes, that Alexander, conqueror of basically everything. Alexander stands before this half-naked philosopher and asks, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And Diogenes, he replies, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." You want to laugh, but it's too perfect. The most powerful man in the known world gets told to move his royal ego out of the way. That's clarity. That's zero fear. That's a man who cannot be bribed, bullied, or distracted by sparkly things. It's also, frankly, hilarious. After leaving Diogenes behind, because let's be honest, your nostrils need a break, you head back toward the agora. But something has shifted. You keep noticing how many people are wrapped up in things they don't control. Merchants bicker over coins. Poets whimper about critics. Politicians flex, flatter, and fuss. It's like watching a three-ring circus where no one knows the elephants are all illusions. You start to understand why Zeno might have been drawn to this lifestyle of mental minimalism. Stoicism doesn't copy cynicism, but it definitely borrows the foundation. Where cynicism says, burn it all down, Stoicism says, sort through the mess, keep what aligns with reason. And then there's Socrates. You duck into a shaded alcove to escape the sun, and find an old man reciting Socrates' trial like it's a bedtime story. You already know the ending, condemned to death by the Athenian state. He drinks hemlock rather than beg or compromise. What matters more, though, is how he lived. Socrates is a ghost that haunts every Stoic idea. He taught that wisdom comes from knowing how little you know. He stayed calm in the face of insults, questions, and even death, because he believed the soul's health was more important than anything external. Your body, temporary. Your stuff, replaceable. Your virtue, that's eternal. You imagine being in his shoes, standing before your accusers, knowing the end is minutes away, yet feeling no bitterness. You sip poison with more grace than most people handle slow Wi-Fi. There's a scholar nearby who mutters that historians still debate how much of the Socratic legacy is real and how much is Plato's remix. You nod politely, even as your brain starts folding in on itself from philosophical whiplash. But it's not about solving the mystery of Socrates. It's about recognizing what he stood for: the examined life, that quiet resilience, that refusal to trade inner clarity for outer applause. So now you've got three figures bouncing around in your head: Diogenes, the human middle finger to all social norms; Socrates, the quiet juggernaut of rational virtue; Zeno, the bridge who took their raw ideas and built something practical, stable, and yes, stoic. You sit beside a dry fountain, watching shadows stretch like lazy cats. It's not that these men were perfect. Far from it. Diogenes once defecated in a theater, just to make a point about societal hypocrisy. Socrates spent so much time questioning everyone that his wife probably had to invent new ways to get his attention. Zeno was so severe that he could have passed for a statue of himself. But all three, each in their weird, radical, slightly unwashed way, were onto something. They lived their philosophies, not in polished speeches or academic debates, but in their daily actions: simplicity, self-awareness, independence from chaos. You start to feel it again, that subtle shift, a quietness behind your eyes. Not numbness, not apathy, just space. Like the thoughts are lining up, instead of yelling over each other. There's a basket seller near the fountain, humming to herself. You help her lift a heavy crate, and for no particular reason. It makes you feel good, not because you'll get something, not because you're showing off, just because it's right. That's what Zeno meant. That's what Diogenes was pointing at in his strange, onion-scented way. That inner compass that doesn't wobble in every storm. A moral GPS that works even when the world feels like a maze of broken signs. You walk home slowly, past flickering torches and worn cobblestones. You don't speak. You don't need to. The silence is full. And when you close your eyes that night, the thought returns. Softer this time. You are not your circumstances. You are your character. You wake up groggy, wrapped in a dream where Diogenes was chasing you with a scroll of sarcastic insults, only to realize it's morning again in Athens. Today, you're not heading to a porch or a barrel. You're going to meet the brainiac who turned Stoicism from a noble idea into a full-blown system so dense it could give modern spreadsheets an inferiority complex. His name is Chrysippus. He's the guy who made Stoicism stick. And by stick, we mean explode, with the force of a philosophical supernova minus the radiation. Unless you count all the second-hand olive oil fumes. As you approach his study, the scent of ink and goat parchment hits you like a warm papyrus slap. Chrysippus isn't lounging. He's not meditating. He's writing, constantly. He supposedly wrote over 700 works. Yes, 700, and probably would have invented PowerPoint if he had access to a candle-powered laptop. He's pacing now, muttering syllogisms under his breath, like a man composing an opera made entirely of logical statements. If virtue is sufficient for happiness, and you are virtuous, then you are. He stops, looks at you, and nods. Welcome. Let's stretch your cortex. Here's where Stoicism takes a cerebral turn. Up to this point, we've had big vibes. Control what you can. Be virtuous. Don't cry over spilled goat milk. But Chrysippus, he's obsessed with how we think, how the brain interprets the world, makes choices, and experiences emotions. It's not enough to say live rationally. He wants a blueprint, and he builds one, using logic, propositional logic, to be exact, which is a fancy way of saying, if this, then that applied with surgical precision. It's not quite modern symbolic logic, but it laid crucial groundwork. Historians still argue whether he truly invented formal logic as we know it, or just refined earlier systems. Either way, the man was the Stoic version of a coding genius. You sit on a stool while he explains that all human impressions, fantasiae, must be analyzed. You don't automatically trust your feelings. You test them. Imagine every thought arriving at your mental doorstep like a suspicious package. You don't open it until you've confirmed it's not a glitter bomb of irrational panic. He calls this the cataleptic impression, a kind of perception so clear and undeniable that the sage accepts it as true. But most people, we accept every junk mail thought as gospel. They didn't text back. They hate me. I stubbed my toe. Life is meaningless. Chrysippus wants you to stop, analyze, and decide, is this aligned with reason, or am I being hijacked by emotion in a bad disguise? Suddenly, you're realizing that Stoicism isn't just about standing tall in a storm. It's about examining the raindrops. But Chrysippus wasn't all spreadsheets and logic puzzles. He understood emotion too, pathe, as the Stoics called them. To be clear, Stoics don't hate emotions. They just divide them into two types: unhealthy ones caused by false judgments like rage, envy, dread, and rational good feelings, eupathei, like joy and virtue, calm, acceptance, and love, based on understanding, not obsession. You remember yesterday's stroll past the theatre? All the actors, the drama, the weeping. Chrysippus would have leaned in, whispered, "Don't suppress your emotions, train them, like unruly pets, or mildly rude interns." Now he's scribbling furiously about fate. According to him, the universe is a web of causality, so tight, so elegantly entangled, that nothing happens at random. You drop your cup of wine, that was always going to happen. Not because you're cursed, because every cause has a cause. All the way back to the birth of the cosmos, he calls it heimarmene. And yes, it's a little terrifying. But here's the twist. Accepting fate doesn't mean surrendering. It means aligning with the nature of things. If it rains, don't argue with the sky. Grab a cloak, or better yet, dance in it. The Stoic sage doesn't control the world. They control their response to it. You shift uncomfortably. But doesn't that mean everything is already decided? Where's free will? Chrysippus raises an eyebrow, like he's been waiting centuries for someone to ask that. Think of it like a cylinder. He says, the push starts the roll, but its shape, its nature, determines how it rolls. In other words, external events might trigger your actions, but your internal structure, your values, your logic, your choices, shape the outcome. It's a clever compromise. Fate sets the stage, but you still get to perform. And the Stoic goal: be the kind of person who always plays their part with grace, courage, and a bit of philosophical flair. A quirky tidbit: Chrysippus reportedly died from laughter. Yep, he saw a donkey eating figs, cracked a joke about giving it wine to go with them, and laughed himself to death. Which, honestly, is the most stoic thing imaginable: finding cosmic absurdity in the everyday and exiting the stage mid-laugh. But his impact, dead serious. He turned Stoicism into a vast, organized system. He categorized the universe into 3 studies: logic, physics, and ethics. Logic teaches how to reason. Physics shows how the world works. Ethics, that's how to live well inside it. The Stoics believed these weren't separate disciplines, but interconnected like branches of a tree. You can't live rightly without understanding how the world functions. And you can't understand the world if your logic is fuzzy and your emotions are flailing like a toddler with a sugar crash. You walk out of his study with your brain absolutely fried, but also clearer, like someone wiped the fingerprints off your mental lenses. You still occasionally petty, anxious, mildly hungry, but now you've got tools, a mental toolkit to examine, correct, and reroute your patterns of thought, and you start to see how Chrysippus shaped the Stoic legacy. Without him, Stoicism might have stayed a quiet porch club. With him, it became a philosophical fortress, strong, detailed, and hard to misinterpret unless you're Twitter. In which case, good luck. As the sun sets, you sit beneath an olive tree and do something new. Nothing. Just sitting, thinking, not judging every passing cloud, not fearing the next thought. You're not a sage, not even close. But tonight, you're a little more logical, a little more stable, a little more stoic. The breeze feels different now, cooler, more Roman. You're no longer threading the narrow stone lanes of Athens. Instead, you're wrapped in the deep hush of marble courtyards and perfumed senators. The Greek world may have birthed Stoicism, but Rome's about to dress it up in togas, march it through an empire, and give it a dramatic, imperial glow-up. You're in Rome now. Baby, Stoicism survives the slow philosophical fade of Athens by hitching a ride with the Romans, who, let's be honest, love a good mental discipline almost as much as they love roads, baths, and conquering everything. The transition isn't seamless. Romans aren't here for abstract theory. They want practical wisdom, fire-forged virtue, and the kind of inner armor that'll hold up when barbarian spears start flying. Enter Epictetus, born around 50 CE. This guy starts life as a slave in the household of Nero's secretary, which is about as safe as juggling knives in a lightning storm. Epictetus is, quite literally, owned by the empire, but somehow he ends up becoming one of its wisest voices. When you finally meet him, he's sitting on a wooden stool in a modest room that smells like candle wax and dust. His left leg is lame, possibly broken by a cruel master years ago, but there's no bitterness in his eyes. Just that familiar stoic calm, and maybe a flicker of "you've got more excuses than sense." He greets you with a smile, like a challenge, and launches right into it. Some things are up to us, some things are not. Confuse the two, and you'll suffer. You're not even in the room 5 seconds and you already feel slightly attacked, but also seen. Epictetus doesn't just talk about Stoicism. He lives it. He teaches that freedom is internal. You can chain a man's body, but if his soul stays aligned with reason and virtue, he remains free. It's a bold claim, especially from someone who lived in chains. He compares life to a role in a play. You don't choose the part, but you can choose how to perform it. You might be cast as a beggar, a senator, a nobody in the chorus, but either way, act well. Don't demand a rewrite of the universe's script. Just learn your lines. He's practical to the bone. A student once asks how to prepare for insult. Epictetus shrugs and says, if someone calls you a donkey and you don't feel insulted, have they really insulted you? Then he adds, unless you are a donkey, then maybe fix that first. You can't help but laugh. Stoicism, Bromanedition, has bite. Gone is the leisurely chatter of painted porches. Now, it's a rougher, simpler, survival-grade stoicism. One you can pack into a shield or a senator's scroll case. Historians still argue whether Epictetus wrote any of his own work or if it all comes from his student, Arrian, who jotted down his words like a philosophical fanboy. Either way, the voice comes through clear, firm, compassionate, occasionally snarky, and always grounded. You leave his humble school in Nicopolis with a new mantra echoing in your head. You are disturbed not by things, but by your opinion of them. So you test it. A merchant overcharges you for bread. Normally, you'd grumble. Today you pose. Ask yourself if that extra coin really cost you peace of mind. You keep walking. That coin was cheap compared to your serenity. The Roman Stoics have a different flavor, a distinct personality, where Zeno gave you structure and Chrysippus gave you logic. Epictetus gives you steel. He tells you, stop trying to control the ocean, learn to sail. Then there's Seneca, Rome's wealthiest Stoic, which feels like a contradiction until you realize Stoicism doesn't ban wealth. It just tells you not to marry your identity to it. You're in Seneca's villa now. Silk drapes, gold goblets, garden statues that could pay your rent for 10 years. And yet, he's writing essays about death, simplicity, and how to remain calm when emperors start looking twitchy. Specifically, one Emperor Nero. Yep, that Nero. Fiddles, fires, and a streak of tyrannical paranoia, wide enough to ride a chariot through. Seneca was his tutor. Spoiler, it didn't go well. Still, Seneca tried. He wrote letters to his friend Lucilius. Letters to Lucilius still read today, and filled them with reflections on mortality, self-discipline, and how to live virtuously in a world on fire. Sometimes literally, he says things like, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And life is long. If you know how to use it, you feel these words hit differently when they're written by a man trying to stay sane, while his student burns Rome and frames him for it. Here's a fringe tidbit for you. Seneca once practiced poverty drills, deliberately sleeping on the floor, eating cheap food, wearing ragged clothes, just to remind himself that he could survive without luxury. It wasn't punishment. It was training, proof that if fortune ever turned, he wouldn't panic. Eventually, Nero orders Seneca's death. Seneca complies with stoic poise, slitting his own wrists in a failed attempt at a clean exit. Then, calmly dictating philosophy to the very end, you can almost hear him whispering, "This, too, is part of the role." So here you are, drifting through an empire that's stolen Greece's gods and philosophies, but added its own bloody, pragmatic flair. Stoicism evolve, adapts. It becomes the armor of generals, senators, soldiers, even slaves. It's a philosophy not for the ivory tower, but for the mud-soaked battlefield of daily life. It tells you you don't get to choose your fate, but you do get to choose your reaction, over and over again. In joy, in loss, in boredom, in crisis. You stroll past the Roman Forum as the moon rises. Marble columns glisten like skeletal sentinels of reason. Somewhere, a soldier scrubs blood from his armor. Somewhere else, a widow weeps under a statue of Fortuna. And somewhere, a quiet young man reads Epictetus by candlelight, trying to become unshakable in a world that seems designed to shake. The empire may rise and fall, but Stoicism, its heart beating quietly through logic, courage, and a dash of sass, keeps marching on. The candlelight flickers. Rome is older now, cracked at the edges, like a statue that's seen too many emperors come and go. And in a quiet study, lavish but not ostentatious, a man sits, writing with slow to deliberate strokes. The room smells of wax, leather, and something deeper, the weight of power. His name is Marcus Aurelius, and he's not just any philosopher, he's the philosopher king, like, literally, emperor of Rome, master of armies, ruler of the most powerful civilization on earth. And yet here he is, scribbling nightly meditations in Greek, not Latin, not for an audience, and definitely not for Instagram. Just raw, private reflections, wrestling with ego, mortality, and the absurdity of being a good man with a crown. You arrive late, his guards barely glance at you. Marcus waves you in, distracted but calm, and gestures toward a chair. He looks exhausted. His tunic is stained from travel, his eyes heavy. You can tell he's been at war, both out there in the frostbitten north, and deep inside his own skull. He doesn't speak for a while, just writes. Then, finally, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Boom, that's Stoicism, straight from the throne. See, Marcus didn't write his meditations as a masterpiece. He wrote them as survival, as a nightly soul scan. Each line is like a whisper to himself in the dark. Stay humble, stay calm, don't strangle your general, even if he deserves it. He calls life a river relentless, cold, sweeping everything along. His job, not to stop the current, but to wade through it with dignity. You flip through his notes. There's no grandstanding, no imperial swagger, just a man trying not to lose himself. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. He writes, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Honestly, you half want to stand up and salute. And yet, Marcus's reign was no marble fantasy. He ruled during plagues, invasions, political chaos, and personal loss. His co-emperor died. His generals betrayed him. His own son, Commodus, would later go full gladiator maniac and basically unravel everything. Historians still argue whether Marcus failed as a father or simply couldn't control destiny. Either way, the irony stings. The man who embodied stoic virtue fathered the guy who thought he was Hercules. Oof. Still, Marcus never used philosophy to run from reality. He used it to face it. He knew he'd be lied to, flattered, misunderstood, worn down, and his strategy, simplicity, service, and a kind of spiritual weightlifting. Every single morning, you read another passage aloud when you arise in the morning. Think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. And then the very next line, you may wake up grumpy. That's normal. Show up anyway. Classic Marcus. He saw anger as poison, fame as fleeting, comfort as unreliable, but virtue, that was non-negotiable. He believed the universe was governed by logos, the rational principle threading through everything, and that the best life was one lived in harmony with it. Sound familiar? That's Zeno, alive again, now wearing a laurel wreath and leading legions. But Marcus had something new: tenderness, a softness around the edges, where Epictetus is sharp and no nonsense. Marcus leaves space for pain, beauty, and contradiction. He admits when he's tired, when he feels pulled by ego, when he wants to quit, but he doesn't. That's the Stoic flex. A quirky tidbit. Marcus loved philosophy so much, he kept a copy of Epictetus's lectures under his pillow like a teenage fangirl with a favorite band. Imagine the Emperor of Rome waking up next to a worn-out scroll, muttering, "Control your impressions," while soldiers outside sharpen their swords. You wander out of his study into the crisp dawn, and you can't help but think, if the guy running an empire can still pause to reflect, to breathe, to write down his flaws, what's your excuse? Rome's cracking. The pressure of empire is boiling, but Stoicism, still holding, still whispering beneath the marble and ashes. Live according to nature. Control what you can. Let the rest slide. And now, as the sun rises behind those grand old domes, you realize how far the philosophy has traveled from a humble porch in Athens to the heart of imperial power. Zeno built the skeleton. Chrysippus gave it structure. Epictetus gave it steel. Seneca gave it flair. And Marcus, he gave it a soul. You sit beside a statue of Jupiter, trying not to get bird poop on your tunic, and think about what it all means. Maybe Stoicism isn't about perfection. Maybe it's about trying daily, stubbornly, even quietly, to be just a little more human, to pause when you want to snap, to speak gently when the world screams, to carry your pain without making it someone else's problem. You notice something strange. People nearby seem calmer, as if Marcus's presence softens the edge of things. You wonder if he ever knew, in those long, candlelit nights, how much those thoughts would echo through centuries, because now you're part of it. You're a thread in the Stoic tapestry, woven from reason, resolve, and the occasional sarcastic barb about people who don't use turn signals in their chariots. The journey's not over, but for tonight, you sit with Marcus, one last time, listening, learning, whispering your own promise to the wind. I will try. I will return to reason. I will be steady. Even when the world is not. The air feels thinner now, like you've risen above the noise of history and are standing at the summit, looking down not with pride, but with clarity. You've walked with Zeno, dodged onions with Diogenes, passed syllogisms with Chrysippus, and watched Marcus Aurelius wrestle with the burden of being both emperor and human. And yet, somehow, the journey's not about them anymore. It's about you. You're back on the road. Not the marble walkways of Rome or the Stoa of Athens. A modern road, asphalt humming under the soles of your sneakers, car horns in the distance, and the dull throb of screen burn behind your eyelids. The world has changed. Sure, but the chaos, the unpredictability, the sneaky, existential dread tucked behind every inbox notification, that's timeless. And so is the cure. Stoicism didn't die with the emperors. It lingered, mutated, hibernated in dusty libraries and fringe universities. Then, slowly, and it crept back into the mainstream like an old song you didn't know you missed. And suddenly, bam, it's on podcasts, in self-help books, on the lips of CEOs, therapists, athletes, and your cousin, who's convinced cold showers are a personality. But here's the kicker. Modern Stoicism isn't a trend. It's a return. Today, you find it in the little moments, like choosing not to rage at customer service over a shipping delay, or resisting the urge to doom scroll when life already feels like a cosmic prank. These are your porches, your arenas, your chance to say, "Okay, world, throw your worst. I'll respond with grace." The modern revival has championed some unexpected. A fringe tidbit: NASA once recommended Epictetus's writings to astronauts preparing for deep space missions, because nothing tests your control over the uncontrollable, quite like floating inside a glorified tin can 200. 0 miles from Earth, with no DoorDash. And in psychology, Stoic principles slide effortlessly into cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. The core idea: challenge your thoughts. Don't believe every mental fart is vintage, Stoic. You start to see the overlap, label the emotion, trace it to the belief. Test that belief against reason. Angry, your boss didn't praise your work. Ask yourself, was the praise necessary? Was the work still worth doing? Is your happiness really tethered to someone else's approval? Boom. Epictetus just high-fived your therapist. Historians still debate whether this modern Stoicism waters down the original or revives it. But honestly, the Stoics probably wouldn't care. They didn't chase fame, they chased clarity. If their words still help someone navigate an anxiety spiral in a grocery store parking lot, mission accomplished. You walk past someone scrolling on their phone, clearly upset, and for a second, you wish you could time travel them to that dusty Athenian porch to hear Zeno's calm voice reminding them, you suffer because you confuse what's within your power with what's not. But you realize you don't need a time machine. You just need a pause. So you pause. Inhale. Exhale. No big epiphany. No trumpet blare. Just the quiet victory of not reacting. That's the hidden power of Stoicism. It's not dramatic. It's durable. It doesn't promise to make life easy. It promises to make you stronger, wiser, more grounded. Like emotional chainmail. You still feel things, but they don't pierce so deep. You remember what Marcus said: the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. So maybe that late train isn't a delay, it's practice. That rude email, a test. That tangled traffic jam of feelings, you woke up in an invitation to clean house. Stoicism doesn't remove the mess. It hands you a broom, and the best part, you're not alone. All across the world, people are rediscovering this ancient clarity, sharing quotes, practicing voluntary discomfort, trying, failing, trying again, building their own porches in apartments, classrooms, even combat zones. You get home, kick off your shoes. There's a pile of laundry waiting, a text you're avoiding, an echo of self-doubt, humming in your gut like a faulty fridge. And still you're okay. You open a notebook. Write one thing you did well today. One thing you could improve. One thing you're grateful for. No judgment. No drama. Just observation. Zeno would approve. So would Diogenes, though he might suggest doing it while shirtless in a barrel. Tomorrow, the world might throw something harder. It usually does. But now, you have a code, a compass, a thread of reason winding back through millennia. Stoicism didn't promise peace and quiet. It promised strength in the noise. And you, dear listener, are learning to stand still while everything moves. Now, Saddleback, let that last idea linger, like a breath held in the hush before sleep. You've walked through centuries tonight, through sunlit porches, dusty lecture halls, var camps, and candlelit studies. You've met men who wore nothing, men who ruled everything, and men who found freedom, even in chains. And through it all, one soft truth kept rising. You can choose how to meet the moment. So, exhale. Let your thoughts slow their march. Let the buzz of your day dissolve into this quieter space. Feel the weight of your body, gently anchored where you rest. The air touching your skin. The subtle hum of everything holding you. You don't have to be perfect. You don't need all the answers. You don't even need to feel okay. You just need to return again and again to that calm center, inside, that still place where thoughts come, but don't command, where emotions flow, but don't flood. Tonight, don't fix, don't analyze. Just trust that clarity isn't a lightning strike. It's a slow unfolding, a quiet willingness to see things as they are and respond. When you're ready, with grace, close your eyes. Let the ancient porch fade. Let the noise recede. And tomorrow, when life knocks again, just smile a little. You're already learning to answer, like a stoic. Hey guys, tonight, we step into a place where the air is thick with steam. The smell is a curious mix of sweat, oil, and maybe some unidentifiable ancient mystery, and where you'll quickly discover that cleanliness was only part of the story. You're standing at the entrance of a bustling Roman bathhouse, or Thermae, the social epicenter of ancient Rome. Here, bodies jostle in warm pools, voices rise in conversation and laughter, and the line between relaxation and chaos is as thin as the towel you're wrapped in, which, by the way, you probably shouldn't trust too much. You probably won't survive this bath unscathed by at least one awkward encounter or the occasional rogue splash. But that's all part of the charm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? I want to know where you're joining from on this sweaty adventure. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a narrow alley, past the clatter of vendors and the scent of roasted chestnuts, to the massive entrance of the bath complex. It's grander than you expected. Columns soaring like they're challenging the gods, mosaics glittering under the sun, and marble steps leading to vaulted doorways that promise escape from the Roman heat. Inside, steam curls lazily, blurring the edges of the tepid pools. The first thing that hits you isn't the heat, it's the noise. Voices rise in friendly debate. Splashes echo off the walls, and the scraping sound of a strigil, a curved metal tool used for scraping dirt and oil off skin, adds an oddly satisfying scratch to the mix. The bathhouse is a sensory overload. You catch snippets of conversation about gladiator matches, politics, and rumors of who's seeing whom. Because yes, Roman bathhouses were the ultimate social network, long before Facebook and awkward group texts. People here come not just to cleanse but to connect, gossip, and flex a little muscle. Men strut in towels that barely cover anything, trying to outdo each other in displays of wealth, fitness, and confidence. Meanwhile, the women's sections, often separated but no less lively, buzz with their own versions of the social scene. You wipe the sweat from your brow, realizing the Romans were onto something. Bathing wasn't a private ritual. It was a communal experience, blending hygiene, leisure, and politics under one steamy roof. Interestingly, historians still argue whether these bathhouses were primarily public health facilities or more about social spectacle, and you can see both sides. After all, it's hard to take a relaxing dip seriously when someone's loudly reciting poetry nearby, or when a vendor is hawking snacks and oils right at the edge of the pool. Before you get too comfortable, you notice a man awkwardly trying to keep his pet bird from flapping into the water, a quirky reminder that pets sometimes accompanied their owners here, adding a little chaos to the mix. And that, you realize, is the charm of Roman baths, orderly chaos, where everyone played a part in the daily ritual of cleanliness and community. As you step deeper into the baths, the heat envelops you, and you realize this isn't just a place to wash. It's where Rome unwinds, connects, and, occasionally, survives. The sound of your sandals echoes off stone walls as you wander deeper into the labyrinth of the bath complex. You can't help but marvel at how far these baths have come, from humble mud pits to sprawling marble palaces, equipped with heated floors and intricate plumbing that would make a modern engineer blush. It all started simply enough. Early Romans, not much different from you trying to cool off on a hot day, would bathe in natural springs or riverbanks. But over time, as the city grew and became the heart of an empire, so did the ambition for something grander. The Roman baths became not just a place to wash off the dirt of the day, but architectural masterpieces designed to impress both gods and mortals alike. Imagine stepping into the baths of Caracalla, sprawling over 27 acres, complete with giant vaulted ceilings that make you feel like a tiny speck under the heavens. The floors are heated by a clever system called the hypercaust, a network of furnaces and hollow spaces that pump warm air beneath the tiles. It's like central heating, but ancient and way cooler. The Romans were masters of engineering. They knew how to manipulate water and heat on a massive scale, turning these baths into literal urban oases. You run your fingers over the mosaics decorating the walls, tiny, colored tiles, forming intricate scenes of gods, animals, and the occasional naked Neptune flexing his muscles. It's both art and propaganda, reminding visitors that even as they soak, they are part of something majestic and eternal. And the social status on display here, oh, it's as layered as the bathhouse's architecture. The emperors and elite had their own private bathing rooms, while the common folk mingled in the larger communal areas. But everyone, rich or poor, was expected to participate in this cultural ritual. It was a great leveler, where togas gave way to towels and social hierarchies melted in the steam. One quirky detail: some bathhouses had libraries, gyms, and even snack bars. Yes, you could hit the books, lift some weights, and grab a bite, all while dripping wet and possibly discussing the latest political scandal. The Romans were basically multitasking before it was cool. Historians still debate whether these architectural marvels were designed mainly for utility or spectacle. Were they intended as health sanctuaries or public theatres of Roman superiority? Probably a bit of both. The sheer scale and opulence certainly suggest the baths were meant to awe as much as to cleanse. Meanwhile, the engineering feats hide a touch of danger. Improperly maintained hypocausts could cause fires, and some water sources were less than pristine. But the Romans were willing to take those risks for the luxury of warm water and social buzz. You catch the faint scent of olive oil and sweat mingling in the humid air, a sensory cocktail unique to these spaces. It's earthy, slightly sharp, and oddly comforting, like a smoky campfire mixed with a fancy spa as you wander through marble corridors and step over bronze grates. You realize these baths are not just places, they're living, breathing monuments to Roman ambition, community, and that timeless human desire to relax while showing off a bit. You're moving now through the familiar rhythm of the Roman bath ritual, like a well-rehearsed dance, passed down through generations. There's no confusion here. Every visitor knows the steps. From the moment they shed their togas to the final plunge into the icy cold pool. First, you step into the apoditerium, to the changing room. It's crowded, noisy, and full of the clatter of sandals and chatter. People joke, trade news, and exchange the kind of gossip that could get you into trouble by dinner. You sling your belongings into a wooden cubby or hand them to a slave. Yes, slaves were common attendants here, ready to help with oils, towels, or a scrubbing tool if you were feeling fancy. The next stop is the tepidarium, the warm room. It's like dipping your toes into a hot bath, but the whole room is heated gently. The air smells faintly of herbs and burnt olive oil, and the stone benches feel warm and welcoming. Here, your skin starts to open up, loosening the grime of the day, while your muscles relax and your mind begins to settle. It's the perfect place to chat, or just soak in the atmosphere. Then comes the caldarium, the hot room, a literal sauna where steam curls thick and hot around you. The heat is intense, wrapping you in a moist blanket that drips from the vaulted ceiling and fogs your glasses if you had any. You sit on a marble bench, sweat pouring down your back, feeling a strange mix of pleasure and mild suffering. It's no accident. This heat was thought to purify, to open pores, and prepare your body for the next stage. Now it's time for the strigil. You watch as the attendant, or sometimes a fellow bather, uses this curved metal scraper to rub olive oil and all the sweat, dirt, and dead skin. It's trapped off your body. The sound is a gritty scrape against skin, oddly satisfying and a bit ticklish. You might try to pretend you're relaxed, but the scraping sometimes tickles more than cleans. A quirky tidbit here: some Romans believed that the dirt scraped off was actually a type of poison or evil spirit leaving the body. So, strigil use was almost like an exorcism. Imagine asking for a spiritual cleanse with your morning shower. Finally, you plunge into the frigidarium, the cold pool. The shock of icy water pulls a gasp from your lungs as your skin tightens and your senses sharpen. It's invigorating, a bracing contrast to the hot rooms, and a moment to catch your breath and feel alive. The Romans believed this cold snap boosted circulation and helped keep illnesses at bay. Modern science mostly agrees, though maybe with a little less superstition. Between dips, you lounge on stone benches, watch swimmers, or chat with friends. Perhaps a vendor sells spiced wine or honey cakes, because even in the baths, Romans loved their snacks. Historians still debate how regimented this ritual was. Some sources suggest most people skipped steps or lingered where they pleased, while others argue the routine was almost like a sacred ceremony. Given the sheer variety of bathhouses across the empire, it's likely there was no single correct way, just a general flow. Everyone understood. You might also notice that the ritual wasn't always about cleanliness, but about status and display. Some men soaked longer to show off their muscles. Others used oils to demonstrate wealth. It was as much performance as purification. And there you are, sitting between hot and cold, watching the steam rise, feeling the slight chill on your damp skin, part of an ancient flow that has kept millions moving, talking, and living. You're now tangled in the delightful contradiction that is Roman body culture, obsessed with cleanliness yet addicted to oils and perfumes, modesty fighting with the urge to flaunt, and the ever-present background noise of competitive grooming. The bath wasn't just a place to wash, it was where beauty trends, social signals, and bragging rights got locked in a sweaty embrace. First up, tools of the trade. Every Roman bather worth their salt or, rather, worth their olive oil carried a kit that could rival a modern beauty influencer's purse. Strigils were the classic must-have, but also came various scrubbing gloves made from animal hair, pumice stones to smooth rough skin, and tiny tweezers for plucking stray hairs. Yes, hair removal was serious business, especially for men who wanted to look polished and sharp. If you thought waxing was a modern torture, just imagine a Roman man grabbing hot resin and ripping it off his skin. Yikes. Scent was equally crucial. Olive oil was the base for most grooming, used not only for cleansing but for moisturizing and shining the skin. Then came the perfumes lavender, myrrh, and exotic imports from far-flung corners of the empire. Wealthier Romans often doused themselves in these scents, turning their bathhouse visit into a moving, fragrant shop. The less fortunate made do with local herbs or cheaper concoctions that sometimes smelled more like a farmyard than a spa. And the towels, oh, the towels. These weren't your simple cotton squares. Towels, or subligaculum, were often thin linen wraps that did little to hide anything, prompting an unspoken competition of who could wear theirs with the most flair and confidence. It was like a Roman version of the modern beach cover-up showdown. Men especially loved flexing their physiques, subtly or not so subtly, showing off gym results and status, while pretending the towel was purely functional. Now, here's a fun fringe fact. Some scholars suggest that ancient Roman men might have had gladiator tan lines from these baths, due to their preferred clothing, or lack thereof, when training or socializing. Imagine a Roman Instagram influencer, showing off those perfect pale and tanned contrasts. Centuries before smartphones, but the cultural importance of grooming went beyond vanity. Clean skin was linked to virtue and discipline, essential traits for any Roman citizen. Grooming was almost a daily affirmation of self-control and order, values held dear by the empire. Historians still argue how much these grooming practices were universal versus elite trends. Was every Roman dude obsessing over tweezers and oil? Or was this mostly an aristocratic show, probably somewhere in the middle bath culture bridged classes, but with clear markers of status? You glance at the mosaic underfoot, showing a goddess holding a perfume bottle, and smile. Here, even art celebrates the quest for beauty, reminding you that the Romans saw bathing as an experience for body and soul, sometimes wrapped in a towel, sometimes proudly bare. As the oily scent of lavender mingles with the smell of hot stone and sweat, you realize that Roman baths were as much about looking good and feeling powerful as about washing off the day's grime. you start to notice something else beneath all that steam and soap, a murmur of deals, whispers of power, and the subtle dance of politics playing out on slippery marble floors. The Roman bath wasn't just a spa, it was the empire's unofficial parliament, stock exchange, and reality show all rolled into one. Imagine senators, in togas, now swapped for towels, leaning casually against warm columns, chatting about laws, wars, and the latest gossip about Emperor Augustus. Bathhouses were one of the few places where status could be both asserted and questioned. You might overhear a senator trying to persuade a general, or a merchant pitching an investment, all while soaking in the caldarium. It's the kind of networking you'd expect from a LinkedIn party, but with less awkward small talk and more olive oil. Everyone from spies to prostitutes found their niche here. Some bathhouses even had private rooms where more discreet meetings happened, or where shady deals were brokered away from prying eyes. No wonder the baths had a reputation as hotbeds of intrigue. Quirky side note, some emperors had personal bathing attendants who doubled as spies, listening carefully for juicy tidbits or plotting rivals' downfalls. Talk about multitasking. You could say the bathhouse was an early office where water cooler talk was a bit steamier. Of course, not all business was high stakes. Bathhouses were also the place where contracts were signed, lawsuits discussed, and gladiators hired or sold. The buzz of economic activity rivaled the splashing and laughter. Historians still debate how openly political activities were conducted in baths. Some think these meetings were common and central to Roman public life, while others believe most of it was exaggerated by later writers. But the architectural design with private rooms, tucked away from public pools, suggests a place built to accommodate secrets, as well as scrubs. You can almost picture the tensioned noblemen lounging with one eye on the bath and another on their rival. Voices low but sharp, and sometimes all that politicking erupted into brawls or dramatic exits, turning what should be a relaxing soak into a full-blown soap opera. As you watch a group of men pass around a rolled-up scroll, the weight of centuries presses on you. This wasn't just water and steam, it was the pulse of Rome itself, flowing through its veins in waves of conversation, deals, and alliances. So, next time you think about political backroom deals, remember, they might have started in a bath, where everyone's guard was down, except for the occasional stray splash or overheard secret. You start to notice that beneath the grandeur and bustle, the baths also had a darker side, one not often mentioned in the glossy tourist brochures of ancient Rome. You might assume these sprawling pools of warmth and laughter were sanitary utopias, but the reality is messier, stickier, and occasionally downright gross. For starters, those same pools where senators nursed political ambitions were also home to a surprisingly diverse population and some less than pleasant biological residents. The water was not always pristine. Without modern filtration systems, bacteria and parasites could thrive in the moist environment, turning the bath into a kind of ancient germ hotspot. If you think public pools today can get sketchy, imagine a warm, crowded Roman bath with hundreds of bodies, lots of sweating, and occasional offerings from local wildlife. Yes, historians still argue about how often rats, snakes, or even frogs found their way into the water. Noise was another issue. The baths were loud, people shouted, vendors hawked wares, musicians played, and sometimes you'd get the occasional wrestler or gladiator demonstrating moves right next to the pool, turning what should be a place of calm into an arena of chaos. This cacophony, combined with the steam and slick floors, made it a wonder anyone managed to relax at all. There was also the issue of theft and pickpocketing. With so many people squeezing into tight spaces, wallets, jewelry, and even clothes were surprisingly vulnerable. You'd need sharp eyes and a sharper mind to avoid losing your sandals, or worse. Some bathhouses employed guards or slave attendants specifically to keep an eye on valuables. But the threat lingered. It was like ancient Rome's version of keep your phone close in the subway. A fringe theory suggests that some bathhouses might have been used for less savory purposes, gambling dens or informal brothels, though the evidence is sketchy. It's clear, however, that not every visitor was there for cleanliness or socializing. Some came looking for distraction or escape. Still, the baths remained wildly popular. Perhaps it was the balance of pleasure and peril, the thrill of the crowd, or simply the Roman love of spectacle that kept them packed day after day. Historians debate how much the risk of disease and crime dampened the bath's popularity. Some argue it was minimal, overshadowed by the bath's social and health benefits, while others think these dangers eventually contributed to their decline. As you step carefully on wet marble, dodging a vendor and a group of loud teenagers, you can't help but admire how these ancient baths mirror our modern spas, gyms, and social clubs, with all their joys and annoyances intact. You wrap yourself in a towel, smelling faintly of olive oil and musty stone, realizing the bathhouse was a place of contradictions, luxury and grime, order and chaos, healing and hazard. The sun is setting now as you linger in the last glow of the bathhouse, feeling the cool evening breeze against your damp skin. You realize these ancient Roman baths were more than just places to clean up. They were intricate microcosms of Roman life, reflecting everything from politics and power to beauty, health, and even danger. By this point, you're probably wondering how these grand baths survived or didn't as the empire crumbled and centuries passed. The truth is as complex as the bath's mosaic floors. Some baths fell into ruin, stripped for their marble or abandoned as the water supply dwindled. Others were repurposed as churches, homes, or marketplaces. Yet, echoes of Roman bathing culture survived, influencing bath traditions in Byzantium, the Islamic world, and even modern spas. One fascinating tidbit: the concept of communal bathing didn't vanish but evolved. The hammams of the Middle East and the Turkish baths we know today owe a surprising debt to Roman predecessors, blending cultural influences into new rituals of cleansing and socializing. Historians still debate whether Roman baths were primarily centers of health or social spectacle. Were they temples of wellness or stages for displaying status? Likely, they were both, entwined so tightly it's hard to separate the two. Now, you start to feel the pull of rest, the day's adventures settling into a gentle hum behind your eyelids, the scent of warm stone, olive oil, and steam lingers as a comforting reminder of a world long past but not forgotten. The baths, with all their noise and beauty, grime and glamour, seem like a dream now, a place where people gathered to cleanse not just their bodies, but their spirits, to connect, to compete, and to simply be human. As you step away from the marble pools, the warm echoes of laughter and splash fade softly, blending into the quiet night. Word count 1. Bashidyo. You've wandered the vast halls, felt the heat and chill, and soaked in the stories of a culture obsessed with baths. Now, as your eyelids grow heavy, Let the warmth of ancient stones and distant echoes soothe your mind. Breathe slowly. Imagine the gentle splash of water, the soft hiss of steam curling into cool air, and the faint scent of lavender drifting through time. You are safe here, surrounded by history's embrace, where every ripple tells a story, and every drop carries a whisper from the past. Let the calm wash over you, easing the day's tension, like warm water over tired muscles. Drift gently into dreams, carried on waves of marble, oil, and steam. Good night, traveler. The baths will be waiting when you wake. Hey guys, tonight, we're stepping into the sun-drenched world of ancient Egypt. Not just pyramids and pharaohs, but a realm where medicine was part science, part magic, and a whole lot of mystery. You're walking through bustling marketplaces, where the scent of herbs mixes with incense. Past scribes hunched over papyrus scrolls, inscribed with strange symbols promising healing and hope. Imagine the flicker of oil lamps illuminating cramped, dusty rooms where healers chant prayers while preparing poultices and potions. You probably won't survive this era unscathed. Remember, they didn't have aspirin, antibiotics, or even the faintest clue about germs. But what they did have was a surprisingly sophisticated system of medicine blending observation, practical treatments, and spiritual rituals. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? I'm curious who's joining me from a cozy night or a blazing afternoon. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start your stroll by examining some of the oldest medical documents ever found, like the Edwin Smith Papyrus, a surgical treatise dating back over Troy, 500 years. It reads like an ancient instruction manual, cataloging wounds, fractures, and treatments with surprising clinical precision. The Egyptians had a remarkable understanding of trauma and surgery, well ahead of many later civilizations. They described everything from broken bones to damaged noses, even outlining procedures to set dislocated joints. Yet, alongside this clinical side, lies a world of magic and mysticism. Medicine wasn't just about physical treatments. It was deeply entangled with religion and superstition. You'll find spells and charms alongside recipes for salves. Sometimes, a healer's success depended as much on incantations as on honey or linen bandages. Here's a quirky detail. Some remedies included bizarre ingredients like ground beetles or crocodile dung, not exactly your modern pharmacy's best sellers. Historians still argue whether these were primarily symbolic, or if any real medicinal value was believed to lie within. Were they psychological placebo? Or did ancient practitioners truly think these bizarre potions worked? Whatever the truth, it's clear that Egyptian medicine was a blend of art, science, and faith, all woven tightly into daily life. It's a world where healing meant mending both body and soul, and every treatment was a delicate dance between the known and the unknown. You close the ancient papyrus, the smell of aged papery fibers lingering, and realize you've just scratched the surface of a medical tradition as rich and complex as the Nile itself. You're still wrapped in the soft flicker of torchlight, but now your senses shift toward the magical heartbeat that pulses through Egyptian medicine. Healing here wasn't a purely scientific endeavor, it was a ritual, a performance where words held power, and gods were as important as scalpels. You might find yourself in a cramped healing chamber, walls decorated with images of Bes, the protective deity, or Thoth, the god of wisdom, scribbling magical spells. Medicine and magic were two sides of the same coin. If a patient suffered from a mysterious illness, it was often seen as the work of evil spirits or divine displeasure. So, healers who were also priests would chant spells, sprinkle holy water, or draw protective symbols to ward off those invisible enemies. You'd see them wielding amulets or wearing elaborate jewelry, believed to channel healing forces. One of the most famous spells was the opening of the mouth ceremony, to usually reserved for the dead, but also adapted in healing rituals to open the body's channels for life and health. It's a reminder that in Egyptian thought, body and spirit were inseparable. An imbalance in one meant trouble for the other. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some healers prescribed what we'd now call placebo treatments, involving the recitation of magical words while administering harmless substances. It's like getting a prescription with a side of wizardry, though. Honestly, sometimes that might have done more good than you'd expect. Modern psychologists even suggest that belief and ritual can trigger real physiological changes. Historians still debate how effective these magical practices were, or whether they slowed the advancement of practical medicine. Some argue that an over-reliance on magic might have hindered empirical observation, while others believe it was a vital part of healing, providing comfort and hope when science alone couldn't. You imagine an ancient patient lying on a mat, eyes closed, listening to the rhythmic chanting, the healer's hands moving in patterns, both mysterious and reassuring. It's a delicate balance between faith, fear, and the desperate hope for relief. These rituals weren't just private moments, they were public spectacles. 2. Healing ceremonies could involve community participation, reinforcing social bonds and collective well-being. The lines between doctor, priest, and magician blurred seamlessly, creating a holistic approach that touched every aspect of life. So next time you think about science and superstition as opposites, remember the Egyptian healer who combined both knowing well that sometimes the mind needs healing just as much as the body. You press further into the dim corridors of ancient knowledge, this time focusing on what the Egyptians really knew about the human body and their surprisingly advanced surgical skills. While much of their medicine was wrapped in magic, they also had a pragmatic side, especially when it came to anatomy and treating injuries. You picture yourself watching a physician as he carefully examines a patient with a broken arm. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, a sort of ancient trauma textbook, provides detailed instructions on how to set bones, treat wounds, and bandage injuries. The Egyptians understood the importance of immobilizing fractures and had specialized splints made from wood and linen. Not bad, considering this was thousands of years before modern orthopedic casts. They also knew about the brain, albeit with a very different understanding than ours. Interestingly, during the mummification process, embalmers removed the brain through the nose and discarded it, which suggests they didn't regard it as essential as the heart believed to be the seat of intelligence and emotion. This gives us a quirky glimpse into how cultural beliefs shaped medical practices. Surgical procedures, though limited by the tools of the time, were surprisingly sophisticated. Some texts describe technique for draining abscess, stitching wounds, and even cauterizing injuries. Egyptian surgeons used scalpels made of flint or copper, and while the concept of anesthesia was primitive or non-existent, there's evidence they employed soothing herbs and wine to ease pain. Historians still argue whether these surgical descriptions reflect everyday practice or idealized instructions for elite practitioners. Some think surgery was rare and risky, reserved for battlefield injuries or nobility. while others suggest a more widespread practical knowledge among physicians. You imagine the sounds of a bustling temple clinic patients, wincing as a doctor works with precision and care. A young apprentice, watching closely, learning the delicate art of healing. The tools, simple by modern standards, are laid out meticulously, reminding you how much early medicine depended on skill and intuition. Then there's the fascinating fact that Egyptians developed early forms of dentistry, recognizing the importance of teeth and even attempting rudimentary fillings. Dental problems were common, thanks to their gritty diet. So caring for teeth was more than just vanity. Yet, despite these advances, some practices seem downright puzzling today. For example, some treatments included inserting poultices or ointments into wounds that might cause more harm than good, reflecting their incomplete understanding of infection. All this adds up to a medical tradition that was both practical and mystical, a blend that kept Egyptians remarkably healthy for their time. Even if they didn't have our modern microscopes or antibiotics, you step back, appreciating how close these ancient healers came to bridging the gap between faith and fact, skill and superstition, body and spirit. You drift deeper into the green-scented world of ancient Egyptian remedies, where the lines between kitchen cupboard and apothecary blurred in the most delightful ways. Imagine the earthy aroma of crushed herbs, the sticky sweetness of honey, and the sharp tang of fermented date wine, all ingredients in a medicine cabinet thousands of years old. Herbal remedies formed the backbone of Egyptian medicine. Papyrus scrolls list hundreds of plants used for everything from infections to digestive problems. And many of these botanical prescriptions sound oddly familiar. Garlic, coriander, juniper berries, and castor oil were staples, each chosen for its unique properties. You might find a healer grinding up willow bark, which contains a natural precursor to aspirin, or mixing honey with resins to create antibacterial salves. The Egyptians even used moldy bread on wounds, an early, accidental experiment with antibiotics, long before penicillin was discovered. A quirky reminder that sometimes nature does the heavy lifting, but it wasn't just plants. Animal products played a role too: milk, fats, and even the odd use of lizard fat or crocodile dung. Yes, crocodile dung was sometimes employed as a contraceptive, inserted as a pessary, a practice that has historians scratching their heads. Some suggest this was based more on superstition or trial and error than real effectiveness, but it highlights the inventive, if occasionally gross, lengths they went to for health. Historians still debate how much of this herbal medicine was based on systematic observation versus magical thinking. Did Egyptian healers truly understand the pharmacological effects? Or was it a collection of recipes passed down through tradition and experimentation? Interestingly, many modern pharmaceutical compounds have roots in ancient Egyptian remedies, showing how this knowledge echoed through millennia. It's like discovering your great-grandma's secret recipe for cold relief is still working today, just with a fancier label. You imagine yourself at a bustling market stall, watching vendors selling dried herbs and balms, while nearby, a healer consults a patient, mixing a fresh poultice. The mixture smells both foreign and oddly comforting, a reminder that healing is as much about ritual as it is about chemistry. These remedies weren't always safe, though some plants used could be toxic, and without modern dosing knowledge, overdoses or side effects were likely common. It's a humbling thought. Even with all their wisdom, ancient Egyptians were navigating a complex, sometimes dangerous, natural pharmacy with only limited understanding. Yet their willingness to experiment, observe, and record-made Egyptian herbal medicine, a foundational chapter in the history of healing. You tuck this aromatic knowledge away, the scent of herbs lingering in your imagination like a whisper from the past. Now you find yourself stepping into the world of the physicians themselves, those ancient doctors who were as much specialists and scholars as they were healers. You picture a crowded temple courtyard where practitioners of different stripes gather, each with their own expertise. From bone setters to eye doctors, all part of a complex medical hierarchy. Ancient Egypt had a surprisingly organized medical profession. Physicians, or SWANNW, it were trained in specialized schools, often attached to temples, blending practical skills with spiritual knowledge. These doctors weren't just generalists. Some focused exclusively on dentistry, others on gastroenterology, or even dermatology. You can almost hear the low murmur of apprentices learning the trade, copying hieroglyphs that detailed diseases and treatments. Interestingly, some medical titles correspond closely to modern specialties. Shepherd of the body was a poetic name for a physician, emphasizing care and guidance. You might chuckle thinking of that as the world's oldest healthcare motto. There were also official lists of recognized medical practitioners, sometimes inscribed on tomb walls, suggesting a professional pride and status akin to what doctors enjoy today. Some physicians served directly under the pharaoh, tasked with the health of the elite, while others worked among the common folk. You encounter a quirky bit of medical bureaucracy. There's evidence that some physicians were protected by law, with penalties for malpractice, though the exact rules are murky. It's a reminder that the stakes were high, even if surgical anesthesia was still centuries away. Historians still debate the nature and extent of medical education in Egypt. Was it a formalized system akin to modern medical schools, or more of a guild-based apprenticeship with secret knowledge? Some papyri suggest detailed curricula, but much remains unclear. Alongside physicians were midwives and healers who specialized in women's health and childbirth, reflecting the vital role women played in medicine both as caregivers and patients. Childbirth was risky, and midwives' skills were highly prized, often combining herbal remedies with ritual chants. You imagine a day in the life of an Egyptian doctor diagnosing a patient's ailment by observation and touch, consulting sacred texts, prescribing remedies, and performing minor surgeries. The mix of science and spirituality was constant, a balancing act between tangible treatment and intangible faith. It's remarkable how professional medicine in Egypt wasn't just about individual skill, but was woven into the social and religious fabric, underscoring that health was a communal concern. So, next time you're scheduling a checkup, think of those ancient shepherds of the body, walking temple halls with scrolls and scalpels, laying the groundwork for the doctors who'd follow millennia later. You wander now into the quieter, more intimate spaces where healing became a communal ritual, ancient Egypt's version of hospitals and care centers. These early healthcare institutions weren't sprawling medical complexes like today, but they served an essential role in treating the sick, injured, and needy. Imagine a bustling temple courtyard doubling as a healing center, where patients arrived, seeking cures from priests who doubled as doctors. These temples, like the famous ones at Karnak and Saqqara, were hubs of both spiritual and medical care. Patients might stay for days or weeks, receiving treatments, prayers, and rest, all within a sacred space. There's evidence that some temples had dedicated rooms for the sick, with attendants providing food and hygiene, a kind of proto-hospital ward. It's a reminder that care went beyond the prescription or the incision. It included nursing, comfort, and observation. One quirky detail: these healing centers often combine treatments with dream interpretation and divine consultation. Patients might sleep in incubation chambers, hoping for a god to appear in a dream with a cure. It's a fascinating mix of medicine, psychology, and faith, showing how ancient Egyptians understood illness as both physical and spiritual. Historians still argue about how widespread these institutions were. Were they exclusive sanctuaries for the elite, or more accessible centers, serving broader society? Archaeological evidence is patchy, and the true scale remains a puzzle. Some papyri describe houses of life, libraries, and medical schools attached to temples, where healing knowledge was preserved and taught. These might have functioned like early hospitals, blending education and treatment. It's interesting to think that these spaces set the stage for the hospitals of later civilizations. The combination of care, learning, and ritual created a holistic approach that addressed body, mind, and spirit. You picture a patient lying on a stone slab, tended by attentive priests and nurses, the air thick with incense and the quiet murmur of prayers. It's a calm sanctuary amidst the uncertainties of disease and injury, even though the medical knowledge was limited by modern standards. The emphasis on care and community highlights a universal truth: healing is as much about connection as it is about cure. So, as you imagine these ancient healing centers, you glimpse the roots of our modern hospitals, places not just for treatment, but for compassion and hope. You've traveled through the bustling markets of herbs, the quiet temples of healing, and the busy workshops of physicians. Now you drift toward the final chapters, where the legacy of ancient Egyptian medicine begins to echo beyond the Nile, shaping future generations and whispering secrets into the vast corridors of medical history. The ancient Egyptians didn't keep their knowledge locked behind pyramid walls. Through trade, conquest, and scholarly exchange, their medical wisdom traveled across the Mediterranean and into the hands of Greek and Roman practitioners. The Greeks, especially, revered Egyptian healers. Herodotus famously called Egypt the gift of the Nile for its wisdom, including medicine. You picture a Greek physician like Hippocrates, paging through Egyptian texts, absorbing botanical knowledge and surgical techniques. Some argue that Egyptian medicine was the foundation upon which much of Western medical tradition was built, even if its mystical elements were downplayed or forgotten. One quirky twist is the transmission of medical papyri, written in hieratic script, painstakingly copied and translated by later scholars. Some texts ended up buried in libraries in Alexandria, where knowledge mingled and blossomed, though the survival of these texts is patchy, leaving gaps historians still puzzle over. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly invented key medical concepts, or if they were part of a broader ancient Near Eastern knowledge network. The cross-pollination of ideas between cultures makes it difficult to assign credit clearly, but the Egyptian contribution is undeniable. This legacy also included some curious practices that didn't survive modern scrutiny, like the use of crocodile dung contraception or magical spells, but even those reflect a holistic worldview, where medicine and spirituality dance together. You reflect on how this ancient medical tapestry set the stage for scientific inquiry, reminding you that the path to modern medicine was neither straight nor simple. It was woven with faith, observation, trial and error, and human hope. So as you settle back from this journey, you carry with you not just facts about ancient Egyptian medicine, but a sense of wonder at how far humans have come and how much we owe to those early seekers of healing along the Nile. Now, as you let your thoughts settle like soft sand drifting down the riverbank. I feel the steady rhythm of history lull you. Ancient Egyptian medicine, with its blend of ritual and reason, was not just about cures, but about connection to the body, the gods, and the community, the wisdom of those healers, scribes, and priests carries through the ages, a gentle reminder that healing is a journey, not a destination. Imagine the soft flicker of an oil lamp in a quiet temple room, the faint scent of myrrh mingling with the night air. Hear the distant murmur of the Nile, eternal and patient, flowing past centuries of human striving and care. You can almost feel the careful hands of an Egyptian physician, steady and thoughtful, working to mend a broken arm or soothe a fevered brow. Rest easy now, knowing that the pursuit of wellness is as old as civilization itself, and that the curiosity and compassion of those ancient healers echo in every modern checkup and every whispered prayer for health. Let their stories fade gently as you drift toward your own peaceful rest, cradled by the soft hum of the present moment. Good night, traveler of time and mind. May your dreams be calm, your spirit soothed, and your curiosity ready for the next journey.